Hey everybody, and welcome back to another max velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down a severe weather outbreak that'll be impacting a large chunk of the United States today. This will bring the threat for large to very large hail, damaging winds, and a few tornadoes. I'll give you the latest breakdown and everything that you need to know in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today. We'll begin with the Central Plains, which is where a low pressure system is beginning to intensify. This is what's going to bring the threat for severe weather across the lower to mid-Mississippi Valley and even back through the Midwest later this afternoon and into the evening hours. We already have some convection that's been ongoing this morning. None of this is really severe, but we are seeing a few strong storms out there, pretty large storms back down in Louisiana right now. But again, nothing too crazy this morning, but things will really ramp up this afternoon as all modes of severe weather will be possible. Now, I'll talk about the severe weather potential for today in depth in just a moment, but let's talk about what's going to be happening across the United States over the next several days. Beginning really with today, we'll have storms fire up across a large chunk of the United States, which we'll talk about more in depth in a moment. Once we go into Sunday into Monday, that low pressure system will move through the Midwest. We'll actually be watching for a little winter storm action back in areas like Wisconsin and Minnesota. We could actually see upwards of a foot of snow out of that event. And once we go through Monday into Tuesday, that low will start to move off to the north and northeast. And another storm I want you to be thinking about next week will be going into Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We'll have a little low pressure system develop over the Central Plains. This will be our next chance for significant severe weather. It seems like for right now, the most significant severe weather will likely be in this region going into next Thursday. But again, we are very far out. Things will definitely change as we get closer, but definitely something to keep in the back of your head over the next few days. Now, in terms of what's going to be happening today, the Storm Prediction Center has issued an enhanced risk of severe weather. That does include areas like Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, and Louisiana. That's going to be for the main concern of very large hail. But further to the north, we do have an extension of that marginal risk that goes all the way back through Wisconsin, even goes into the panhandle of Florida. It's a very large area that we're watching today. And in terms of the main concerns, large to very large hail is definitely the main threat. We could be talking about some scattered hailstones, upwards of baseball-sized hail. So you want to make sure you're protecting your vehicle today, put it in a garage, whatever you got to do, because there will definitely be some very significant hail, especially across that hatched region that extends from Missouri back through northern Louisiana. We do have a large hail threat that does extend all the way back into Wisconsin as well. Damaging wind potential definitely does exist, especially across Illinois, Missouri, as well as Arkansas into northern Louisiana. And the tornado risk isn't too high today, but there is definitely a slightly higher tornado risk across areas in southwest Illinois and back through northern Louisiana. That is where I think the best chances of at least a couple of tornadoes this afternoon, with maybe an isolated tornado or two outside of that in that green shaded region, which is that very low chance of a tornado. You might be wondering, what do we have in place to increase the severe weather potential for today? Well, there will be plenty of moisture without a doubt today. You can actually see the dew points across Arkansas, back through even southwest Illinois. Dew points are into the low to mid 60s. That is going to create a lot of buoyancy to increase the threat of severe weather. Once we go through Sunday, some of you back over on the East Coast might be wondering, will we see any significant severe weather? Well, there will definitely be a lot of humidity, but the problem is there just will not be a whole lot of instability. So the severe weather threat on Sunday decreases substantially. I'm much more concerned about what's going to be happening today. In terms of the instability, there again is a lot more instability today, especially across Missouri and Arkansas. Values upwards of 1,500 joules per kilogram will increase the risk of severe weather. With a lot of instability, that usually creates a lot more severe storms. And then once we go into Sunday, instability values are very, very low across the East Coast. I'm only worried about like an isolated severe storm on Sunday. Also, the low-level jet is a big deal here in terms of the tornado risk. A lot of you have been wondering, are we going to see long track, strong tornadoes or anything along those lines? Well, I have really good news for you, because we're probably not going to see much of that. There will be a low-level jet in place, especially across Arkansas and Missouri. That is where that low-level jet will be around 30 to 35 knots. Again, that's not very strong. So the overall tornado risk will be lower to begin with, and I'm not that concerned about long-tracked or strong tornadoes today. I wouldn't rule out one, but at this point, I'm not very concerned about that. Just make sure you have a tornado action plan in place just in case there are any tornado warnings or even severe thunderstorm warnings in your area. Now, in terms of the timing today, we're going to go state by state in Missouri and Arkansas, then we'll show you a broad view of things. So beginning with Missouri, we're going to be watching for some storm action develop near Joplin around 1 to 2 o'clock this afternoon. Those storms will become severe very quickly. Large to very large hail is the main concern initially. We could very well see a tornado risk develop, though, in the initial cells. Once we get closer to 3 to 4 o'clock, this starts to kind of converge into more of a cluster or line of storms, and this is really an area that we'll be watching watching for that line of storms. We may see a couple of storms back over to the north and east of that, closer to St. Louis and Springfield, that could develop. That large hail concern is the main threat out of those storms. Then we'll be watching for mainly damaging winds and some large hail in this line of storms from Springfield all the way back through Arkansas. Once we go closer to 5 to 6 o'clock, that line of storms will start to really organize itself. And again, this is peak daylight heating, so this is going to probably be the peak of severe weather in terms of damaging winds. So by 6 o'clock, St. Louis, be on guard. Severe weather is likely in that region. And then once we get closer to 7 to 8 o'clock, that line will start to become outflow driven most likely, which means it will be watching for more of a damaging wind threat in comparison to large hail or tornadoes. And by 10 to 11 o'clock, all this moves off to the east. And honestly, I think this line of storms will be weakening very quickly after 10 o'clock tonight, which is very good news. It will not be much of a nocturnal threat. Back down in Arkansas, storms will start firing up around 3 to 4 o'clock. Discrete supercells are the biggest concern today. Those are going to produce the large to very large hail potential and maybe some damaging winds. You can see here by around 4 o'clock near Mountain Home. That is the more concerning area that we could see maybe a discrete cell fire off today. By 5 to 6 o'clock, that line of storms will become more organized. Again, this is peak daylight heating. By 7 to 8 o'clock, storms roll off to the east. Still a very strong and severe line of storms producing most likely scattered to numerous damaging winds and maybe a little bit of large hail, but the damaging wind threat is definitely more concerning. Might see an isolated tornado as well. And once we get closer to 9 to 10 o'clock, storms will be rolling through Memphis, Dyersburg, and back through Mississippi. And eventually this will start to weaken out after 10 o'clock. Damaging winds will definitely still be possible though, even throughout the early overnight hours. Now for the rest of the Ohio Valley, storms will likely fire up this afternoon. We could see some storms out in front of that cold front. Those are not really going to be that severe, but once we go through the afternoon and evening hours, that line of storms does push through areas like Kentucky, as well as southern Indiana and back through Mississippi. The strongest and most severe part of this line of storms will be back down to Mississippi in the overnight hours, but even then you can see here by around 3 to 4 a.m. tonight, it's going to really weaken off very quickly. Nothing really remaining other than just rain, and by tomorrow morning, that thing is gone. Then eventually going into tomorrow afternoon, more storms could fire up back over in the mid-Atlantic region. Those overall, though, will not be too severe. Now, in terms of the winter storm, I mentioned this before, there might be a small-scale winter storm this weekend. This will really ramp up Sunday. We'll see the potential for some heavy snow Sunday night into Monday. That is when we could see upwards of maybe a foot of snow in western Wisconsin, but eventually going into the morning hours on Monday, light snow is possible near Chicago, and eventually going into the evening hours then, some snow will still remain. But overall, snowfall accumulation, pretty impressive for this time of the year. We'll be watching for the potential of upwards of maybe a foot of snow. I don't think we'll get to 18 inches, but I wouldn't rule it out at this point. Back near Chicago, you'll be lucky to see some flurries, maybe a coating, but overall, it's going to be fairly warm there anyways. Now, again, there is a threat of severe weather tomorrow. I'm not too concerned about this, but this will mainly be for the threat of isolated damaging winds, maybe some isolated hail. Tornado risk is going to be very, very low to zero, so I'm not too concerned about that. And then once we go into next Thursday, there is a slight risk of severe weather. This was originally in the southern plains, but things are going to be changing over the next several days, so this slight risk I would expect to keep kind of shifting east and west, so just keep that in mind. But we'll be watching this area closely for our next severe weather outbreak next week. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you've not already.